So we're going to run the colors across the screen that you'll need today and the brushes as well, so you'll know how to get started. I've covered my canvas with a thin, even coat of liquid white, and there's a video on our YouTube channel to show you how to prep your canvas this way. So, feel free to pause this video, go check out that one, make sure your canvas is prepped, and then come on back with us and we'll begin, okay? So as we're getting ready to start this painting, what we're going to do is we're going to take our 1-inch landscape brush. For you, or if you have a 2-inch landscape brush, you're welcome to use that. I'm going to go ahead and use the 1-inch landscape brush just because that's what I happen to have handy. And I know that that's what most of you at home are painting with. Normally on a canvas this size at 18 by 24, I would probably be going into a 2-inch brush, but that's okay. I'm only covering a little bit of sky today, so it's not really a necessity. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to load my brush with just a little bit of phthalo blue. So you notice that I've pulled my paint down with using my palette knife to make a very thin runway. I am just using the very, very thinnest part of that runway that I've pulled down, and I'm just kind of tapping and pulling down just a little bit. Notice my angle of my brush is about 45 degrees as I come down. You don't need to load your brush all the way up the ferrule here, folks. You just need paint just at the very end of your bristles. If you load your brush on both sides, you can load it this way, flip it over, load it that way. You get a little bit of paint on your brush. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go for a very, very wispy blue sky. Now be very careful before you do this. Kind of watch what I do, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave some white voids in the sky. Then those will kind of serve as kind of like some maybe some very, very, very thin wispy clouds that are kind of in the sky. We don't want to coat. I mean, if you want to coat the whole canvas in color, you can, but I would just recommend you don't. So I'm using a very, very light kind of not quite a crisscross stroke, but maybe kind of a rocking stroke that's going to kind of come across here. And I'm not applying a lot of downward pressure. I'm going to load my brush again with some phthalo blue. You can use Prussian blue if that's what you've got, just as long as it's a transparent blue. That's the thing that's most important. And I'm just going to kind of dance some color up in here. Notice how I left that void. You can leave voids wherever you'd like. And like I said, those are going to kind of serve as some clouds for us. Okay. I'm going to come over here, start dancing in some color over here. Keep loading as you need to, but remember, don't use a lot of paint. The less paint you have on your canvas to achieve the effect that you're attempting to do, the better off you are. And the reason is that most of you are probably attempting to paint this in 1 or 2 sittings without allowing the paint to dry in between. Process, it's called wet on wet or alla prima, however you want to call it. And in this style, what'll happen if you use just too much paint on your canvas is that you won't be able to get the next layers on top of it, and then you'll be very, very, very sad. And you don't want to be sad when you're painting, because painting should not be stressful for you. Painting should make you happy. So I'm kind of switching to a little bit of crisscross strokes here so I can kind of blend some of these, make them a little softer. Notice I'm just barely touching this canvas, so you can kind of get a feel for it over time as you do it. So don't be real heavy-handed. Just kind of feel it, see what your paint does, and then you can adjust as you need to, okay? So I'm just going to kind of barely dance around over here. Maybe I'll apply a little more down here, because I'd like to have a little more sky down here. And so you're just leaving a nice little mottled sky. Now this sky, the reason why we're doing this, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I said I didn't want a lot of paint on this sky to make life a little bit easier for us as we're painting. And also too, the sky just really isn't very important in this painting, because we're really going to focus on this distant mountain and then this valley that we're going to put in the front. And so this sky should just pop in there really fast with not a lot of fanfare. It just doesn't matter. Now notice I didn't blend everything to all one dead color. Notice I also didn't cover up in the middle in here. I just put the top here. That's because I'm going to have a big old mountain that's gonna cover up in here. So I'm gonna wipe off my brush a little bit just to get a lot of that excess paint out. I don't want a lot of paint in my brush. If you'd like to, you can grab a clean brush. I have several brushes going up here, and from time to time I'll switch back and forth on these brushes, but I don't need to. In this case, I can just kind of wipe this out get all that excess paint out of my brush. And then what I'm going to do is very, very lightly start using very, very gentle crisscross strokes just to very barely touch this canvas, just to smooth out these brush strokes that is currently in my canvas, okay? I see over here, okay? And then when I'm all done with that, I'm just gonna very lightly, notice I'm rotating my brush until it's almost parallel to the canvas. I'm also applying 0 downward pressure against that canvas. I'm just letting my brush just barely graze this canvas. And what that'll do is that'll take out some of the brush strokes. And not only that, but it'll give just the smallest amount of color into these white spaces just to kind of knock down the super brightness of the titanium white, liquid white that we put on the canvas prior. So that'll just dampen it down just a smidgen. And you don't need to worry too much about anything. Now, if you wanted to clean out your brush, you could do it right here. You could just wipe out that excess paint onto your canvas, and that'll help us later when we get some more lavender down there. We're gonna put a big lavender field down there, so that's not real super duper important, okay? All right, so now we've got this sky in here. What we should start doing is we should start sculpting our mountain. And what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to grab a filbert brush, but you can use a fan brush if you want. If you want to use just the corner of a fan brush, if you don't have a filbert, or if you don't have a round brush, you could also use a round brush, which is actually fantastic for that. You could just use the corner of your brush, and we're just going to kind of sketch in a mountain. I know for those of you who have painted with me in our in-person classes, we don't normally sketch in a mountain. Now, before I do that though, I need to mix up a lavender color, the main lavender color that we're going to use for this painting, and we're going to do that using phthalo blue and alizarin crimson. Okay, so let me show you how to mix these. I'm going to one thing you ought to know. I'm going to take this big pile of alizarin crimson because I don't need it for anything else other than this purple. I'm going to just scrape that up. One thing you need to know about this phthalo blue is it is many, 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 many times stronger than your alizarin crimson, so you don't need as much. So what I suggest you do is grab your alizarin crimson pile, grab a much smaller amount of the phthalo blue, and then you're gonna kind of smash this in here, start mixing it around. You can bend the knife a little bit, get some power in on it. Then what you're gonna do is you can take that knife, scrape up this paint, and flip it over, put it back down, mix it some more, okay? Mix, mix, mix. And the reason for that is that the oil paint that's on the bottom is just spinning around. If you don't turn it over, it'll never mix, and then you'll get big red and blue streaks as you are painting along. Now I'm starting to get a lavender color develop, but mine looks like it's a little bit on the red side. So I think I'm going to add a little bit of blue to it, but I'm going to test this first. And the way that you can test your color is you can kind of pull out a very thin layer. Then you can grab the small edge of your knife, grab just the smallest amount of white paint, and you can kind of mix that in there and kind of see what your color looks like. And mine's just slightly red, so I would like it to be kind of in between red and blue. So I'm going to just put just a smidgen more blue in, and I think that we will have a color I can live with, okay? All right, now whichever side you want, that's up to you. This is your world, not mine. So you decide the color that you want to use. If you want to use a lavender that's more on the red side, that's fine. If you want it to be more on the blue side, that's fine, or somewhere in between. Hey, that's great. Variety makes the paintings just so much better. Okay, so now I've got my lavender mixed here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab I'm using my filbert brush. Like I said, you could use whatever you want. If you have a detail round brush, just don't use a script liner brush. That'll be too unwieldy for you, but you could use the corner of your fan brush. But you want to take this filbert brush over here, and you want to go into one of these little thin areas of paint. And what we're going to do is we're going to mix just a very, very, very light lavender color. And we're just going to mix it with our brush right here on the canvas. And I'm going to make this so light. What we're going to do is we're going to sketch this mountain in real fast, okay? Just using this filbert brush. Don't get too bent out of shape about what your mountain looks like. I'm just going to come up here and just kind of pull one in. All right, so we're just going to kind of sketch this in. It's not going to be big deal. Don't make it a big production. The more of a production you make it, the less happy you will be with the way that your mountain looks in the end. Trust me. All right, So you can just get a few little things in there. All right, so again, if you paint with me in our Bob Ross classes, you'll know that oftentimes we don't do that because Bob did not sketch in his mountains. We normally just kind of use a knife to get those in there. And if you've done that with me in class, you can continue to do that. Just make sure that the paint that you put back here is extremely light. You don't want it to be dark. And the reason is that this mountain that we're putting in right here is going to be so far in the distance that it's harder to see. There's not a lot of detail because, as you know, as you move further and further away in a landscape, the things that are furthest away from you are lighter in hue, or lighter in value, I should say, lighter in value than the things that are closer to you. So for instance, two trees that are the exact same color, if one of them is sitting next to you, it's going to be a very dark green. Let's say it's an evergreen, very, very dark green, but one that's really, really far in the distance might be a little gray green, very light in color. And that's because you have all kinds of things going on. You've got atmospheric distortion. You've got all kinds of things that are in your way between you and that tree. So that's the same thing with these mountains. We don't want to be able to see these mountains very well. We're actually going to try to push them back into the painting. So make sure that you have a very, very light color. Very, very light color. In fact, mine might even be a little dark for me, but that's okay. I'll work with it. No big deal. All right, so I'm going to come in here, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just kind of color in just a little bit, just get a little bit of color, a little bit of paint up in here. Again, don't spend a lot of time because again, we're gonna smooth this color down our canvas with a 1-inch brush, and we want this to be very light. So, you know, I'm just going to kind of scrub this in because I want a little bit of kind of shadows that are going to, from having a little bit of thicker paint some places and thinner paint others. But I'm just going to get a little bit of color up in here. So, all right, so you see how quickly I'm doing. I'm not spending a lot of time, okay? So just, oops, that's okay. Hey, happy accident, there we go. See if that'll become one. There we go. Yeah, okay. So there's a happy accident for you folks. Little change there actually improved my mountain and it was a complete mistake. Yay for happy accidents. Okay. All right, we're going to move some of this paint downward in just a minute. Okay, and that's one of the functions of that liquid white is to help us move paint. So I'm just going to kind of clean out my brush here. All right, maybe get a little more. All right, see how light this is. I don't need a lot of paint. Remember, because the more paint I have on the canvas, the more difficult things are going to be for me later as I try to layer things on top. So, all right, so I am not too worried. Okay. All right. So if you've painted with me in class before, in an in-person class, you kind of know where this is going. We're going to grab I'm going to grab a clean 1-inch brush. I'm going to set this down. That way I can do it right-handed for you. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of brush out and blend these mountains. And the way that we do that is we take our brush. I'm going to start with the furthest away mountain. And what we do is we take this brass part here is called the ferrule. Okay. So we're going to take the ferrule, and you notice it's got a flat side, and we're going to kind of come up to the peak with this corner, and then we're going to kind of rotate our brush and so that it angles angles along with the slope of the mountain. And I'm going to push. Notice I've rotated my handle downward. And the reason why I do that is because that way when I touch the canvas, it kind of makes a knife edge with my bristles. That's kind of nice. And that way we don't destroy the top edge of our mountain. We don't want to do that. So we want to grab, we want to push, and we want to pull downward and to the left for everything that's on the left-hand side of the peak. We're going to pull down and away to the left. Maybe we could bring some of this down. And the things that are on the right-hand side of the peak, we're going to go down and to the right, okay? Now, really, you can brush these however you want, but that's just an easy way to do it. And here, I'm trying to teach the basics of painting. This isn't a master class or anything. You're here probably because you're a beginner painter, and so this is kind of a beginning painting. But it's a pleasant one, right? It's a pleasant, nice beginning painting, and so hopefully you're going to learn something here that you can apply, and as you get better, you can go and take some of our more advanced classes that we have online, or in a classroom if we're back to doing classroom paintings. Hopefully, you can catch us when we're in your town. So. I'm just going to continue on here. Now, what I've done is I've worked from the mountain that's furthest in the background up here. Now, you can stack these mountains however you want. So now that I've brushed some of them down, I can actually move them back and forth by just going right back over, and I can just pull this one in front of that one. But really, I kind of want, just me, today I just kind of want this one in front, okay? And so again, don't worry about blending these all to one dead color. We want some of that variation in our mountains in the color, because they're so far away, we're not going to be able to see a lot of detail. So a lot of this little variation that you have here, hopefully that you have in your paint, is just going to look like shades and shadows without you actually having to do anything to achieve them. And that's kind of one of the fun things about this painting process, is that you can do a lot of things very, very quickly with very little effort if you're just kind of willing to let go, let go and let some things happen. You can just let it happen and it'll be great. Okay. So, all right. So here we go. All right, so I'm going to kind of blend this out. And so when you get down to the base of your mountain, you see this mountain is incredibly light now. But I'm just going to take this kind of rocking stroke, kind of like the Viking ride at the amusement park, the ship that swings back and forth. So kind of like this, and this just helps me blend away the bottoms of this mountain, because I kind of want this mountain to float a little bit. I want it to float over whatever that we're going to put down here. That just kind of helps us, because for the next step where we're going to create just a little bit of mist, I should say after we put a little bit of snow up on these mountains. We're going to put a little bit of snow on these mountains, but we're going to do it a little differently than we normally do it in class. If you've been to a Bob Ross class with me, we really stick to the Bob Ross techniques. But here we're going to do kind of a combination because, well, this is my painting, not Bob's. Haha. So we can do some things that I've learned along the way from other folks. So what we're going to do, though, is I'm going to grab a detail round brush. So I've got a little number 3 round, it's a number 6 floral brush, but it's about the size of your standard number 3. Like, I don't know why this one is numbered as 6 when it's so small, but it is. So here we are, right? So, okay, what I'm going to do is I just grabbed a little bit of titanium white at the end of my brush. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of come up here, and I'm going to put a little bit of paint above the top line where I had my paint earlier from this. And I'm just going to kind of just very lightly pop in a little bit of snow. Okay, so this is going to be so far away. Don't be too worried about the appearance here. You just want to be able to get a little bit of an indication of snow back there. We're not actually trying to put, the snow like we're going to do when we do the much larger snowy paintings. This is just going to be little dance color up in there. Don't worry too much about it. Don't worry. Let's see, I'm going to redo that line. There we go. And then I'm going to kind of pop some in on this. I'm going to assume that my sun is coming from the right today. Most of you who are painting with me are right-handers. It's easier for right-handers to do the snow coming from the right, so that's what I'll do today. Or the sunlight from the right, that's what I'll do today, which will make your snow brighter on the right-hand side of your painting. Just makes life easy so that you don't have to translate it in your brain. Now, us lefties we can do it both ways because, well, we're lefties and we're just that awesome. But you righties, you guys get stuck. You can't translate. I'm just teasing you, right? Okay, so some of you writers are smart. Just kidding again. I know I'm going to get hateful notes now. Brian's prejudice against right-handers. I'm not. I paint a lot of my paintings right-handed just because I like my customers, all my little painting friends I meet. So I've learned to do a lot of right-handed painting because it's just that much easier in class. And see, I'm just putting a little bit of paint here and there, okay? So really don't stress. Don't stress about this. This is not that big a deal. We really, really just want to see a little bit of highlight over here. It doesn't even have to be on every little pop. Just pop in some very loose brush strokes back here. We're not looking for perfection. We're going to blend almost all of this away. So that's why I'm saying I just want to get a little bit of color. Just get a little bit of color up here so that we can blend it away, and then you can this when we blend it, it'll give you shadows in here without actually having to do much of anything except pop in a little bit of color here. All right, we'll do shadow. So you notice I'm predominantly working on the right-hand side of each of these little peaks. Okay, and I'm just bopping this in. All right. Like I said, we're gonna blend. So notice my brush strokes are very, 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 very loose. So just pop these in. Maybe I want to put maybe there's a little jutty out area there. I think that's probably what Bob Ross would have called it, a jutty out area. All right. Let's get some paint up in here. Now, you don't want everything to be a solid dead color. That's kind of one of the reasons why we're doing this, because we just, we need some variations. We need some different shades. And since I've developed this painting so that you could do it with just a couple of colors, we really have to just kind of be creative with the brush here to bop things in here real fast so that we can get some little spots here and there that just provide us some depth by only using one or two colors. Now, for those of you who are wondering why I'm developing this, I developed this painting to use just a few colors, and it's because most of this video was shot during our COVID-19 isolation, and so a lot of my painting friends only have a few colors in their palette. So I'm trying to keep expenses down for you so that we can have some fun without spending a lot of money using the existing colors that you have. And if you're watching this after, that time period, well, that means you know what time period we shot it. So 20 years from now, you're gonna be like, oh man, that's an old video. But the fact is, what we're trying to do is trying to make a pretty painting with very, very little resources for you. And this is a really fun one to do. And once you learn how to do this one, you can make up your own paintings. And gosh, when you do, please share them with us so that we can see them. We love seeing the paintings that folks do with us. So again, don't spend a lot of time. Just kind of pop in some color here and there. Like I said, most of these are going to be blended, and we just want to be able to see some kind of texture. So just these little brush strokes here will just end up being a little bit of texture, just coming down that mountainside. Okay, again, you see how fast I'm going, so just kind of smooth out some of these now. All right, just putting some indications, just indications, not detail, okay? Not detail at all. This is going to be pushed so far back into the background, it's kind of ridiculous. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that same old dirty brush, I'm going to grab just the smallest amount of phthalo blue, and I'm going to come into my white down here where this
kind of lavender is. I'm going to just mix myself a little pile of super, super light shadow color. We'll take a look at it, see what it looks like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just bop in on the left-hand side of my snowy areas. I'm just going to here and there, not everywhere, because I want a lot of that purple to continue to show. I'm just going to very, very lightly. I'm going to put some white back over some of these spots to kind of vary the color back and forth. So I'm just going to kind of scratch in a little blue here. And the reason, same thing. You want shadow. There's a shadow on this side. So we kind of just want to pop in a little bit of color just so that we can see that there's a variance in color. Maybe there's some deep shadows. And you're just going to kind of indicate here and there. Again, very loose brush strokes, doesn't matter. You can pop in a little bit of color really anywhere that makes a lot of sense to you to do. No one's going to judge you but you, all right? So yeah, just pop in. Like I said, the reason why this isn't important, and I know I've said it a lot, but I'm saying this a lot because I know that some of you still have a lot of difficulty letting go of perfection. So I'm telling you that the reason why we're doing this is because we're going to blend all this away. So this is all going to become so super soft you can barely see it. So that's why we're working with super light colors. And I'm telling you just to be loose and fast with these things because they really aren't going to matter. This background mountain is only here to give us some perspective of depth, distance in our painting, right? We want to make this mountain look like it's far away. So this is a great way to do it. And these little blues that we're just popping in here are just helpful to us to provide a little bit of extra shadow. Okay. I'll kind of blend that away. And maybe I'll go back in and finish up by taking that brush. I'm going to wipe out the excess paint out of that brush. I'm going to go back into my white and, maybe I'll shore up some little areas here and just provide a little more color to them. Just a smidgen though, because we don't want a lot. And just work quickly and be happy because, oh gosh, painting should be fun. Now I'm going up here on some of these edges with a little bit more paint and just kind of stippling in a little bit of color just where I think the light might really ping it. Just to give it a little more oomph just on some of these spots. Not a lot, but with some of them. And that'll help separate them too. So as I'm kind of putting a little bit of paint up in here, it's providing a little bit more separation so that these mountains appear that they're kind of stacked on one another. And there's not a lot of texture. Like here I'm putting some texture in some paint. The rest of it down here very smooth. And the reason for that is because they're so far away we're not going to see a lot of distance. But up here at the top of these peaks, I might get some really clear vision. Because when you look at mountains, I lived in the Rockies for, 5 years or so. And you can see the peaks of the mountains much clearer than you can see anything else on them. And so I'm going to put this paint up here just to give a little more definition right along some of these little edges. Anywhere where I think that it might really, really be protruding out and might actually be more exposed to the sun than other spots. So maybe there's some color in there, but like for instance over here, there's not a lot of, I don't think that that's going to get smacked by the sun very much. So I can kind of, all right. All right, that's about all the time we need to really spend on that mountain. It doesn't really need a lot to be done. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick up a clean 1-inch landscape brush, and what I'm gonna do now is we're gonna kind of brush these out. So be careful with this brush because you can really do a lot of damage to your mountains. But what we're gonna do here is we're gonna create a little misty area down here, and then we're gonna fluff these mountains to really kind of diffuse them a lot, okay? So the way that we do that is we take the top corner of the brush, we're using about this many bristles. Okay, so I'm rotating it so that I'm holding it like this. I'm gonna rotate my brush up just a little bit, all right? And then I'm gonna kind of go up the same angles as the slopes. So if I'm going up a slope this way, then I'm tapping up this way. And if I'm going up the left-hand side of the slope, I'm gonna tap up this way, okay? So you'll see me kind of go back and forth. So I'm tap, 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 tap. Notice I'm not tapping straight across. You don't want a straight line. You kind of just want things to continue, you know, in kind of a more of a random thing. It makes it look a little more realistic if you don't have a straight line going over things. So I'm gonna go up that one. And you can tap out as much as you want. You know, if you want to go all the way up your mountains because you don't like your mountains, I mean, that's fine. Really, this is just to create a little misty area down here. I'm gonna go up the very top of this mountain over here. I'm really gonna diffuse that. I'm gonna go up a lot of these. And I'm gonna go up pretty high on my mountains because I really want these to get pushed back into that background, okay? So I've tapped it, now I've kind of wiped that out. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rotate my brush. So I'm gonna come at it flat ways. I'm gonna come up the slope and then away from my canvas, okay? So with no downward pressure. So I'm just gonna use the sides of the bristles of my brush, and I'm gonna come up and away from that canvas to fluff it out, okay? And I'm gonna come up just the same way that I tapped up and away, up and away, up and away. And that's gonna really mist out the base of our mountains. And when we do this, it's going to create mist plus distance, right? So it's gonna push these back so they're really hard to see. We're not gonna see these details in here. So at the bottom, I'm gonna show you a different way to kind of fluff up at the top. All right, so I'm continuing to fluff, continuing to fluff. So now this is starting to go off into the distance. All right, so I'm gonna just be very careful. So not a lot of time on that. But what I also have here is another soft blender brush, and we can get you a couple of blender brushes. This just happens to be the one that I have here today. We do sell a really nice blender brush. Mine is currently drying because I used it on another painting a few minutes ago, so I'm grabbing this one. But this one's a super soft, nice little brush. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna do the same thing with this. I'm just gonna kind of stir things up, even on these peaks back here. And I'm just gonna I'm kind of fluffing away from my canvas just like we did before, but I'm even, like I said, going back to these peaks just to soften these up because, again, I want these pushed back into the canvas. And if I have all that detail that I put in, remember when I put in that last little bit of paint on the ridges of each of the mountains, then that will seem way too close. So I want this to get pushed back into my canvas. So I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to blend, and I'm going to spend a minute, no downward pressure onto this canvas. Okay, and I am making all of these details that we just put in, I'm making them all go away. So I told you we didn't need any of that stuff. So I'm just kind of fluffing them up. Okay, and this just pushes them back and back and back into our canvas. Being very careful here, right? So blender brush is a really handy thing to have. And you can give us a call. We can get you one. That's not a problem. You can't get the one that I currently have in my hand, but that's okay. The one that we have works just as well. All right, so now I've got this really distant mountain range here. And hope that you're liking yours. I'm actually pretty pleased with this. And I know that you can't see right now the effect that this is going to have, but you're going to be able to see it in just a minute when we do the next step, when we're going to put in a mountain range that is that's in front of it. It's going to cut across. And I know as you signed up for the painting, you probably saw that we had a big old mountain. Well, really foothills, and I think in Colorado we would call those foothills. So I just picked up a hair off my canvas. If you get a hair on your canvas, you can come up underneath it with just a couple bristles and flick away. Don't go at your canvas with a pair of pliers or your fingers, because then you'll just mess up your paint, and then that'll make you really unhappy. You won't like that. Okay. All right. So let's grab a palette knife. Okay, and I'm going to switch to my right hand here, since I know most of you are right-handed. What we're going to do is we're going to take a little edge of our dark colored paint. Okay, we're going to move forward in our painting now. And I'm going to smash this paint out till it's very, very thin, and I'm going to grab just a little ribbon of paint at the end of my knife, just a little ribbon. It's not a ton, okay? What I'm going to do now is come across this mountain with a much darker paint. Remember, we talked about things that are further off in the distance are very, very light in color. But here I told you to go directly into your very, very dark paint. This is the color we used for our background. This is the color we're going to use out here. And so what we do is we take this little ribbon of paint, and we're going to use that long top edge where you loaded the paint as the top of our mountain. So rotate your knife as you go around to kind of shape a mountain. Okay, and the way we do is we're going to come across the one that we currently have. And when we do that, if we come across the one that we have, it's going to push this mountain deep into the background, okay? Much more than if we just created it down here. The very fact that you come across a mountain really, really puts a lot of depth into your painting. So here's how we do this. We just come up here, and you can kind of just smash your painting in. I'm really sorry that I have to destroy the edge of my mountain right there. That's really awful. I'm going to continue to load. Now, you don't need a ton of paint for this, because you're going to be able to reuse a lot of the paint that you have here. You can kind of just get up in here. You're gonna end up scraping off this paint, so I can actually grab this paint again, reuse it to come across. So I'm just going to come down and across with my knife. Notice how I'm using my top edge of my knife to create a pretty sharp edge. And the areas that are kind of getting messy here, you can see them. I'm just kind of coming up here and grabbing some paint, maneuvering my knife around, and then just kind of filling them in. Okay. So I'm just kind of smashing this paint in. I'm scraping it back off. You can hear how hard I'm scraping, and then I'm putting it back onto the canvas and using it, picking it up, using it. You can't possibly scrape enough paint off of your canvas. All right, you want to scrape that paint off. Because you don't need it. It'll just cause you more trouble than you want if you just keep it on there. Because the next steps, of course, we're going to brush these down. We're going to put a little kind of like lingering snow over these foothills. And you don't want a lot of excess purple paint on here. You want to get this off of here, and we'll do the same thing we did on the mountains, and before it, we'll brush these mountains down, okay, to help remove some of that excess paint beyond this. Boy, the fumes of the paint just got me right there. I thought I was about to lose my breath there. So I'm just creating some little rocky, rolling foothills here. You know, just some little gentle rolly tops. And I'm just doing that by just kind of making some bowls, and like a bowl shape in between each of these little peaky areas. And notice down here in my foothills, the peaks are not very pronounced. Okay, so they're more rolly than they are pointy. Okay, those are technical terms. You can look it up. And, so I'm just gonna put these in here. Whoops, it's gonna be too much paint. edge of the canvas where your stretcher bar is, those are always kind of a pain to deal with. So I'm just kind of struggling through that just for a minute or two. There we go. Now again, you notice that I didn't put a big batch of paint down here, okay? Because remember, we don't need, you may have learned from the ones up there that you don't need a ton of paint, because you're going to pull a lot of that paint down these hills when we brush them down with the brush, okay? So I'm scraping the paint off now and reusing it as much as I can. Maybe I'll put a little more in, but not a ton, just where I can't spread it out very well. I'm pushing in hard here to stain the canvas with the paint that I'm picking up, and then I'm picking that back up because I do want it stained, but I'm picking that paint right back up. And applying it somewhere else. So I want this to be a little darker because this is going to be a lot closer to us. I know that this looks flat right now, but in a minute we're gonna put some depth into these mountains, and you're going to see that we're going to stack them back, coming this one furthest in the distance to this one being closer. And that's a real easy process to do. I'll show you how to do that. And it's just like the mountains in the background. You can put them in whatever order you want, but since this is the terrain that I'm familiar with from my own life, I kind of made it the way that I know some of these cool little valleys are formed, and it's a very, very simple thing to do here. So let's go back, and I'm going to grab my 1-inch brush, put my palette down there, make it a little bit easier to maneuver, and I'm going to grab that dirty brush that I used before. Let me grab another couple of paper towels. Keep my stuff clean here, right? So I'm going to wipe off some of that excess paint. By the way, you see I got paint all over my hands. There's a great product that we make called Scrubby Artist Soap. So you can get some of that. That'll take that paint right off your hands. It's an all-natural soap. We make it right here in the studio, and that'll take that paint right off your hands. So we can get that for you. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this 1-inch landscape brush, and we're going to do the same thing. What I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to work from the furthest to the nearest. So I'm going to start brushing the little teeny tiny mountain that's in the back. So this little hill, I should say hill and not mountain, the little teeny tiny hill that's in the back. So I'm going to start, and remember, the things that are to the left of the peak, we're going to go down and to the left, and the things that are at the right are going to go down and to the right. You can also, there's some places, there's a great place with some sandstone formations in Colorado where I lived, that everything goes in one direction, and those are kind of cool, and maybe that'll be a painting that we'll do at some point in the future. But these types of hills really do have two sides. So I'm going to kind of come down and to the left of the peak, down and to the right here, and then I can just stack the next one on top of it and cut right across and through that, and that'll stack these just in order. Now, every once in a while, again, part of the thing that we're attempting to do is to remove excess paint. So every once in a while here, in between each mountain or so, kind of wipe off the excess paint off your brush. We're using the same procedure before. We're rotating our brush downward, pressing up to get that knife edge, and then we're going to pull down and to the left down and to the right for the things that are on the right-hand side, down and to the left for the slope on the left-hand side of this thing, and then we'll just continue moving on, okay? Wipe off that brush in between. Keep things moving. Don't pull this mountain all the way down into here because we're going to have some trees and some land. So you want to leave yourself room beneath your little foothills here. Bob Ross would call these footy hills. So So you want to leave room underneath your foothills, okay? You can shape these however you want. It doesn't matter to me how you shape them. Again, it's your world, so you do whatever you like. I'm just taking, moving some of this paint over here. Just kind of fill that in. And you can kind of just go back and forth, shape these mountains. Now you should be getting a little bit of color as you're pulling down from the peaks. You might get a little darker color in between each of your little hills here, and that is a good thing. You let that kind of happen naturally for you, and then just leave it alone, because that's going to provide a really nice little kind of a draw, right, where some snow might get trapped in between there. Maybe this time period here, maybe this is before, since there's a little snow back here, maybe there's going to be a little bit of snow in the front. Maybe this is before the big spring thaw, or heck, maybe it's an early snow in the fall. You know, it could be either or both of those things in your mind. It could be, can't technically be both, but you know what I mean. Both are a possibility, is what I mean. It could be whatever you want. This is your world. So, okay, so now I've got my kind of mountains shaped up. Now what I want to do down here at the bottom of my mountains is I want to use crisscross strokes and maybe some of those rocking strokes, a combination of the two. I want to kind of blend this out so that there's not a big harsh line there. So we'll just kind of blend this out. I'm using crisscross strokes right now, and I'm just kind of pulling some of this paint down here at the bottom just to kind of blend it so that that bottom line, like I said, is not so harsh. We don't want harsh lines down here because it's kind of jarring to our folks who are looking at our painting. Hopefully you're going to have folks who are looking at your painting and enjoying it. All right, so now I'm kind of using some of those rocking combination, flipping back and forth as I see, and you'll get a feel for whatever you think is best for yours. Okay, and I'm going to take this excess paint out of this brush. I'm coming from the outside of my canvas and I'm coming across and away. Okay, just to get a little bit more color on the canvas. Don't go back the other way or you'll leave a nice harsh mark in your canvas. You don't want that, okay? You don't want that. Here, I'm just going to kind of blend that out a little bit. I'm just putting some excess paint down here because I don't need it. But there's no sense in wasting it. Might as well get it off and brush onto the canvas to kind of coat that canvas, because this is all going to be purple down here anyway. So this will just kind of help me with a little bit of color. And we're going to pull some more color down in here in a little bit, so don't worry about, if you didn't coat it like I did, don't worry. Okay, I'm just cleaning my brush just to turn the rest of the canvas a little bit of color. All right, now I got most of that paint right out of my brush. All right, I'm going to wipe off the excess in case I've got any left. Probably not. Okay. But same thing here. You can, well, let's make a mist here in a minute. I'm going to show you something else that's really cool before we do that. We'll make a mist after this because what I want to do is I want to tap out some of the snow that we're going to put in here in just a little bit. Okay, so we've got our snow and our peaks back here, but what about those little things that we talked about earlier that kind of get trapped in between each of these little peaks where maybe the sunlight really never hits it during the day, and so it stays a little frozen longer than everything else? Well, there's actually something you can do for that. And what we'll do is we'll pick up our number 5 palette knife. This is a smaller palette knife. And you've got the longer edge on your knife, and there's also a small edge. So right now I'm going to use this very, very small edge. Okay, so I'm going to do this lefty here, hopefully. And I'm just going to grab just the smallest amount of paint on the edge of my knife, on the small edge of my knife. And what I'm going to do, let me add a little bit of blue to that just to knock it down just a little bit. Let me mix it into, I had a little bit of blue down here at the edge of my titanium white paint. So yeah, don't make it real super blue, but a little blue will help and knock it down so the colors aren't as vivid, because remember, it's further away. So atmospheric perspective would tell you that the color's not as vivid back there. So what I'm going to do is come up in here into this little area where I think that the sun might not exactly hit. I'm just going to kind of hold my knife however it's comfortable for me. And I'm going to touch this canvas right here with that little ribbon of paint. And I'm going to just kind of go back and forth and kind of just give a little bit of a scrub into this canvas, and this little paint, or this little snow back here, will just kind of magically appear. Okay, maybe there's a little bit over here. All right, maybe this one has a little bit. Maybe they all will. Maybe we'll just, I sure like this technique. It really is very light touch, very, very light touch. But now we just have some snow kind of trapped in here, in these little areas in between each of these little foothills. In the springtime, there'll be water running down them. Like I said earlier, they call them little draws, right? So water will be running down each side of these little things into these little draws, and then they'll come down. They'll come down these little foothills, certain little patterns. So I got a little purple that kind of is creeping into mine. That's great because that just keeps it, that helps add shadow. All right, kind of dampens down the color, maybe, so that means maybe there's not as much there because it's not as bright white as here. Maybe there's a pile up of snow here, but maybe there's just a little bit of snow there. So yeah, put these things wherever you think they should go. That'll give me the indication there's another peak behind this little bit of snow. So we'll just get a little bit here and there. Maybe we'll get a little bit on this side, maybe on that side too, because that'll be the shadow side of the... Yeah, we'll just give a little bit of color up there. Maybe there's some creeping down over here. You can put it elsewhere in your mountain too. It doesn't have to be just from the top. Okay. Just very light touch, very, very light touch right here. Just scrub that in just a little bit, with like no pressure. And here I'm just using kind of the same technique that we use when you do mountains in the class. I'm barely touching the canvas and then just kind of pulling across. I'm not even allowing my knife to touch the canvas at this point. I got a little ribbon of paint at the end of my knife and I'm just kind of skimming it across the top. So that way since this mountain is so much closer to us, we have just a little bit more detail in the snow, because I'm just pulling. If you want to give it a little bit of a rounded thing, you can kind of just pull that over and give it a little bit of color over there. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to wipe off the knife there, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to grab that, just grab that little dirty lavender brush that we had here. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to just use the top corner of that brush. We're going to do the same thing we did back here. We're going to kind of create a little bit of mist, so we're going to kind of tap up these little areas here. Okay. And you can decide how far you want to go. We're creating a little misty area here so that we can put some trees in front of these mountains, because remember, you have to have light to show dark and dark to show light, so we want a little bit of darker trees going here. So since we have a very dark area here, what we're doing by creating this mist is we're actually mixing the bottom of this with the liquid white to create a little bit of mist. Okay, now we can do the same thing that we did before, up and away from the canvas, to kind of help mix this liquid, this lavender with the liquid white back there, and this will take out the brush strokes that we have. And since it's mixing with the liquid white, don't worry about that. You're going to get a little bit of mess down here. Don't worry about that. We're going to take care of that as soon as we get done flicking these out. Okay, again, make these a little bit blurry down here at the bottom. Okay. All right, I'm going to wipe out paint out of my brush, and then I'm going to blend this area here really well to get rid of all those little stray marks that came down here. I'm going to switch to my right hand here so you can see a little better. So that'll get rid of all those little marks that we had down at the bottom of the mountain from our tap marks, and that'll allow us to blend in some of this liquid white to really create this misty area up in here into these mountains. Okay, so now we have just a hint of misty area. Look, I need Scrubby Artist soap for that too. I'm an absolute mess when I paint. Hope you are too, because that's more fun. Okay, so now that we've got that done, we're going to grab a number 3 fan brush. And number 6, if you've got a number 6 fan brush, number 3, it's fine. It doesn't matter which one you use. I know that most of my painting friends have a number 3 fan brush, so that's what I'm going to use. You can use a number 6, though. It'll achieve the exact same results. The only difference is one's bigger than the other, so it's not that big of a deal. Wow, that fan brush. Phew. This is why you brush or wash your fan brushes when you're done using them. Wow. Apparently I forgot to brush or wash that one. Whew. That'll cost me, right? Yeah, like $8. That's okay. I'll be able to recondition. I've got some good soap that we make here called Scrubby Artist Soap. I'm sorry, Swishy Brush Cleaner. The Swishy Brush Cleaner that we make here, I'll be able to recondition that brush, so no problems there. Okay, so I'm taking this fan brush. I'm going directly into some of this dark color. All right, and we created this nice little misty area back here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some little trees. The way we do that is we rotate our brush so that they're perpendicular to the floor. Yeah, perpendicular. Yeah, parallel, perpendicular, right? And then we're going to rotate our brush upward 10 or 15 degrees. So that way we're going to be just using the top half of our brush. I'm loading just some paint at the very end of my bristles, okay? So there's not a ton of paint in there. So, you know, don't go hog wild and load your brush and then get paint all over the place. Then, you know, write me those nasty letters I've referred to several times already during the video here. We don't like nasty letters. So yeah, just put a little bit of paint in your brush and then we can all avoid the problems, okay? All right. I know I'm never serious, sorry folks. All right, and it's when you're shooting a video in a room all by yourself, it's very strange. Okay, so my strangeness is coming out. Okay, so I've rotated my brush upward. Now what I'd like to do is I would like to create some little hills in here. The way we're gonna create the hills, though, is we're going to imply there's a hill there by the way that we put in our trees. Okay, so I'm going to put in my tree here, and I'm going to just touch and pull downward just a little bit. Okay, and see, I'm just going to tap, 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 and pull, tap, tap, pull, tap, pull, tap, and pull. And then if I want to go up a hill, I'm going up this way. Okay. All right, here, let me fill in between these. If you start getting little fence posty looking things, just come down here and fill in the bottoms in between each of these trees. Otherwise, you won't be happy with them at all. They won't look right. So this is meant to look like a bunch of distant trees. Okay, so we're just giving the impression there. So I'm going up, up, up into my hills. Okay, don't kill all that mist you created though, but you know, you can kill a little bit here and there, but keep some of that mist behind your trees. But I want to go upward and downward to imply that there are hills in here. Also too, as I'm getting closer, my trees are going to start getting taller. Okay, so I've got little short trees here. And don't worry, we're actually going to get rid of a great majority of the bottoms of these trees in a minute to create some land. So don't worry if you've got like a little mess down here at the bottom. That's okay. We're actually going to use that to our advantage. That actually helps us create some little land areas. So don't stress about that too much. Okay, but we're just going to put these little distant trees in here. Maybe we want to come down. Maybe we've got a little downward slope going on there. Now I'm just going to keep loading this brush. So don't try to eke out additional trees with an unloaded brush. That you will definitely be sorry about if you try to do that. It just doesn't work. So it's always best to have paint on your brush. And I know you were trying to not squeeze out more paint out of that tube. I get it. You know what I mean? I get it. But squeeze the paint out of the tube and you'll be much happier with the end. You can always save any excess paint that you've squirted out. You know, you can put it in a little, like a condiment cup that seals up, or you can take your palette and put a piece of cellophane very tightly over it, make sure that there's no air going into it, and then and you can save it. I actually put some of this lavender paint in a condiment cup, and it's lasted me more than a week in that cup. Now I haven't tested it longer than that, but heck, I'd imagine it could last a lot longer than that. And if you think about it, since there's no air going into that cup, and just like there's not in a paint tube, oil paint, as long as it's not exposed to air to allow it to start the curing process, a tube of paint will last you forever. So if you leave it completely sealed and there's no damage to the tube. So, I tell you all that just to say, hey, squeeze out the paint, right? Because you are going to be happier in your painting life if you always have enough paint on your brush, and you will be miserable as a painter if you don't, because your paintings won't look right. And then you're going to write me, I'm in my ripe old age, and you're going to say, Brian, it took me 30 years to finally listen to you when you told me to put paint on my brush or on my palette, and now look what I'm doing now that I have enough paint. And I'll say, told you. I don't know a lot, but I know that. You can't paint if you don't have the right tools to do it. Okay. Now I'm getting a little taller with my trees now. They're coming down a little further because now we're getting a little bit closer. Okay, we've kind of taken a bend, in our land. So my trees are getting bigger. And if you've ever seen these kind of trees, these are kind of cool little trees. These are those kind of like tall, spindly evergreens. I don't know what they're called. Some of you tree experts out there probably know exactly what they're called, but before shooting this video, I didn't think to look it up. But so we're going to put 2 or 3 different types of trees in here. We'll put your normal trees that you see, evergreens, and then we'll put a couple dead ones in the foreground, which are kind of neat to do, and then these little spindly trees here off into the distance. These are just fun, and they're so simple to do, you know, as long as you don't stress about them. And you see how easy I'm just putting them in. Like, I'm not stressing about them. They're going in pretty much all by their lonesome because I'm not really doing much to them here other than just tapping this canvas. But the point is that we're making impressions of trees, you know, an indication. You know, Bob Ross would always say, like, an indication of things, and so did Bill Alexander, his predecessor. If you ever watched Bill Alexander, they would both talk about just put an indication of things, because your viewer's mind isn't really expecting a tree to look exactly like a tree. They know that they're looking at a 2-dimensional canvas. So you're just trying to trick their brains into thinking that there's one there. And so you just have to have an indication there, and the person's brain is going to fill in the rest. All right, so I got some kind of big trees going here. Looking good. Just tap, 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 tap. Let's get a couple in over here. These are much, much closer to us now. So we're going to make these guys really pretty big, but still no detail, right? We just know that they're getting closer to us. All right, but there's no real detail, okay? All right, now, so we've got really tiny little trees to much, much bigger trees. So I'm going to put this down for just a moment, and I'm going to grab my, that purple brush that we've kind of been working with. I've wiped out the excess paint out of that brush. And what we're going to do is come up to the canvas. Now we're going to form the lay of our land. The way we're going to do that is we're going to take our brush and we're going to hold it parallel to the floor, okay, parallel to the floor. And we're going to come up here, rotate our brush downward just a little bit so that we can create that knife edge when we touch. And I'm going to cut off the bottoms of my trees, and I'm going to pull in a little slope. So however you want your hill formed, pull your paint from the bottom of these trees off in that direction. So grab this paint and move it, okay? Move it, and you'll see that it'll cut off the bottoms of your trees, and it's going to start shaping your land, and it's going to put in shadows. Your sunlight is over here, and even though that this area is really shaded and there really shouldn't be prominent shadows, the fact is you still do get a little bit from reflective light that's kind of coming in this valley. So again, this valley is meant to be completely dark, no direct sunlight, but you will get a little bit of this light that spills over. So if you just grab the bottoms of your trees and start to cut them off and then pull them in the direction you want your land to flow. So I want a very slight hill this way. So I'm pulling almost horizontal, but not quite. Now I want this to be a little more slopey hill. So I've changed the angle of my brush to just put this in. I can put in these little areas here where maybe my tree line goes back behind this front tree line. So maybe this tree line disappears behind this one. And so now I've got these guys up here. And these guys are all going down this very slightly sloped hill. But see all these variations in my color? That's what you're looking for. You're looking for that. Because that just adds depth and dimension to your painting. And so now really this painting just got transformed, and I hope that yours did too. It got transformed into something that looks kind of like a painting. Okay, before, these beginning steps of our paintings, sometimes, oh my gosh, they just look rough and you just don't know how it's gonna go, But this step right here is where this painting comes together, and you'll notice that we've now pushed these mountains into the background, those mountains push those into the background, and these mountains push those little cloudy things off even further into the background. So we're building the depth that we were looking for in this painting Okay, just be very careful on these hills. Okay, you want to take this paint and you want to very gently move it, and you want to just shape the line of these trees and then move these hills downward so that you get a really just an interesting effect. I mean, it's just the coolest thing ever, and you can put all these little uneven, because you know your forests aren't, or your tree lines aren't all going to be like straight in line, so you want to make sure you take out the symmetry by having some little jutty areas that run back. Heck, maybe these things back here, maybe they're little paths that run in between the things. There's 2 or 3 of them. Maybe they're all little paths, you know, little foot trails back there. You never know. There's some amazing places inside the tree lines, and maybe that's one of them. So we've got our nice shadows come in here. I'm just going to kind of brush these out. Okay. But don't blend this all till it's one dead color. Leave this, right? So you've got variation. So assume that even though this is a lavender painting, assume that you've got, you know, some hills and there's some grasses that are maybe growing so there's some light and dark inside those grasses, and all of those things are going to kind of just be implied, even though this is all just one color, okay? Which I think is just the coolest thing ever, okay? That you can do so much with just 1 or 2 colors. All right, so we've got our tree line done. Let's build a little jutty area of land that kind of comes across here, just to give us one more plane. You know, the more planes of land you have in here, the more things get pushed back in the background, the more depth you have in your painting. So why don't we take that same dirty brush, we'll come back into our paint, and we'll just kind of touch a little bit of paint, you know, grab one of the little thin areas of paint in here. Just load one side of your brush, like a 45-degree angle, just kind of tap in. Get just a little bit of paint. You don't need a lot of paint for this. And let's just kind of decide where we want a little area of land, maybe just a smallest little rise up in here. So let's come in. Maybe we'll go like this. Watch this. Doesn't have to be much. So again, you don't need a lot of paint. Okay, you just need a little bit of darker color. Now notice that I'm putting that on top of my lighter color that we have in our land, because remember, you got to have dark to show light, light to show dark. So I'm using this light spot in the land to my advantage so that I can show this additional plane of land here. And again, everything doesn't have to be the exact same solid dead color. You know, you can leave some of these dark and light spots in there. So let's just kind of fill this in just a smidgen, okay? And I'm just tapping and pulling directly off. I'm not stroking my canvas. Tap, 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 tap. Okay, touch, 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 touch. You can see I'm kind of socking it into my canvas just a little bit, okay? All right, and that's what I'm doing right now is just giving a little bit of extra depth into the land here. So it's not just one line, giving a little bit of depth. Now I'm going to take this brush, I'm going to wipe out that excess paint, and then I'm going to do the same thing that we did down here before. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to grab the bottom of it, and I'm just going to pull this bottom of this however you think is the best way to do it. Just so all of this goes down that hill also. You just blend it gently. You don't have to do a lot of damage to it, but this will just kind of blend these colors in. It'll give you some nice lights and darks, so you'll have some shadows that are built into this, and that'll give you just a little bit more depth, and you can blend out the bottom of that as well, and then you can kind of set that aside. All right. So let's go back to our dirty fan brush that we used for these background trees back there. And let's load this brush. Let me show you how to sharpen your brush real fast. What you want to do is you want to come up here with your brush. You want to kind of angle it down 45 degrees. You want to put it into your paint. Pull and wiggle. Flip it over. Pull and wiggle. And then pull straight down. Flip it straight down. And that'll sharpen your brush so that it's back in shape. Because when you were pounding on that canvas, you were probably just, splitting up your your fan brush. By the way, there are some things when these brushes, from doing these techniques, when these fan brushes get all chewed up and bad, save them because they're great for putting in grasses, okay? Very, very, which I'll show you later, the technique to put in some grasses, but the worse your fan brush is, the better your grasses are gonna look. It's gonna be fantastic, okay? So hang on to those old fan brushes, get yourself a new one. And if you're just starting out painting, you might only have one of each type of brush, but if you've been painting for a few months and you think you're serious about it, get yourself 2 or 3 or 4 of each kind of brush. I have 5 of each, pretty much going up here today, just because that way you can switch back from your lights to your darks, or if you're having some issues with a particular brush, you can always go grab another one. You always have a nice spare. And we can get all that stuff for you too. Just let us know what you need and we'll get it for you. All right, so let's learn how to do some trees. There is a YouTube video that'll show you more in detail how to do your happy little trees. So let's put in some close evergreens so that when we do that, these will get pushed further back in the distance. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hold our brush so that it's perpendicular to the floor. Let's put in a few trees, a few pine trees over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just tap in, let's see, let's start, gosh, where do we want to put it? Let's start one right here. Now, I don't recommend going over your snow if you can avoid it. Now, composition should dictate whether or not you go over your snow, right? So sometimes you just have to. But the reason why I caution you against it, especially if you're a beginner, is because it's really hard to get through that white paint. What'll end up happening is your paint that we're trying to work with isn't going to go over that paint, and then you're going to be fighting through white. White's going to get into your tree in the foreground, and you're not going to be happy about that. So while you're a beginner, I would recommend just kind of looking for some of these little, voids in color inside your mountains, and that's where you can kind of let your trees to live, okay? All right, so we've put our what I've done here is I've tapped down just a guideline. Now notice I didn't stroke the canvas, I just very gently tapped it. That's gonna be my entire length of my trunk, so use that as your guideline, okay? So if you're right-handed, just do everything that I'm doing here opposite. So I'm a lefty, so I'm gonna go 45 degrees to the left. So if you're right-handed, go 45 degrees to the right, okay? So I'm going 45 degrees to the left, I'm gonna go 45 degrees downward, and then I'm gonna rotate my brush back 45 degrees. So all 45 degrees, right? So there's nothing complicated. 45 to whichever side hand you are. So right-hander is 45 to the right, lefty's 45 to the left, 45 degrees down, then rotate this brush back 45 degrees. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna just touch in some evergreens. The way we're going to do this is we're going to touch in, barely touch, and we're going to pull directly off. We are not going to stroke the canvas. We are not going to twist our bodies all kinds of ways around this canvas, because I saw that on some of your other videos, some of you were attempting to outsmart your brush, and I just want to tell you that brush is smarter than we all are. It knows exactly how to make trees. All you have to do is shake it out. You just have to be nice to it, and it will do exactly what you want. And the way that you're nice to it is to hold it exactly the way it wants to be held. So 45, 45, rotate back 45, touch lightly, pull back. It will leave some paint on your canvas, okay? So again, there's a YouTube video, so you can go take a look at that in a little more detail. So I'm just gonna kind of touch very lightly, come down my trunk, and now let's start making a little tree. Now I'm gonna push in a little harder, and I'm coming out. All right, but again, I'm not stroking my canvas, I'm not twisting my brush. Notice that both sides of my trees, I'm holding my brush the exact same way. So I'm not rotating my brush around. I am maintaining this exact hand position the entire way, okay? So don't change your hand position. I know it doesn't feel right at first, but trust me, you are going to want to hold that brush exactly the way that I showed you, or your trees will not work, okay? They won't work at all. Now, in the future videos, I will show you on different paintings different ways to do trees, okay? But on this one, I'm using a very standard method for the trees. For those of you who have painted with me in my in-person classes before, you know that this is the way that we typically will do them in class. Sometimes we'll do something a little odd, but this is the easiest. This really is the easiest way to make your trees look fantastic with very, very minimal effort. Okay, so now that I've showed you that full speed or slow-mo, let me show you in full speed. Hey, one thing that you can do if you really want to push these mountains into the background is have your tree start up here in this nice bright area, and trust me, it'll push this back. And let me show you an example of that. Let's say that I want a nice, because everybody needs a friend, right? So we need like 4 or 5 trees over here. So let's give this guy a big friend. Oh, look at that. Maybe this is, the daddy tree or whatever. And so I'm just going to touch the canvas down here. I'm going to reload that brush. Again, don't try to eke out another tree. Don't continue to touch the canvas in the same spot because that'll just mix mud. Okay, so generally speaking, the very first way that you touch your canvas is going to be the correct way. Notice that I'm just touching straight and then I'm coming straight off of my canvas. All right, so here we go. Coming down the tree. He's got a little skinny top. Maybe he's had a lot of growth this year. Somebody ate his Wheaties. Got lots of exercise. Got fed right. All right, so he's skinny. He's a skinny guy. He's watching his weight, managing it pretty well. All right, so he's a tall, skinny guy. And notice that as I'm getting down here to the base of my tree, I'm using more and more of my brush. All right, so more and more of my brush. And look, down here, I'm using the entire brush. And I'm just gonna pop in some little ground brush. You always get those around trees. All right. Oh yeah, look at that. You can kind of shape a little extra layer of land like that if you want. See how I'm just bending the bristles of my brush? You can do that. I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna resharpen my brush because we need some more trees, don't we? Sure we do. But see how just putting this over the top of these mountains, just push those off back into the distance again. That's really the kind of stuff you're looking for. It's really cool. And gosh, this is why painting is just fun, because you're tricking people into thinking that they're seeing something that they're really not. And I think that's one of the beauties of art is a lot of it. I mean, it's all just illusions, all just illusions. You're tricking their minds. Here's a little guy. Maybe that's a baby tree. Because you know what happens when you get 2 trees together, right? Right? You always get a third one, right? They can't keep their hands off themselves. So you end up getting a bunch of extra trees. If there is such a thing, I like trees. I like trees a lot more than I like people. Except you guys. I like you guys, but all right, so I'm just kind of popping in a bunch of little guys here. And maybe he's going to be on that hill. 1, 2, 3. Oh yeah, let's put in another one. What do you think? Yeah, let's put in where do we want him to live? Let's have him live right there. But let's make him another tall one. And I'm going to put it right through that paint after I told you guys not to do it. But hey, composition dictates. Right? This guy's going to be crooked, like a politician. Right? Maybe he's out here on the outside because maybe they don't like him so much. All right, so this tree is going to come right over, and that's going to be hard to see against some of those background trees, and that's okay. All right. In other paintings that we do, we really try to differentiate by putting highlights on this tree versus the back tree. In this one, we're not going to do that because because this valley is all sitting in shadow. It's conceivable that it would be difficult to see both some of the things in the foreground and those trees that are back there in the midground. It might be difficult to see both of them. So I'm not going to worry too much about attempting to differentiate these two in this particular painting. It's not that important to me. The important thing here is that we understand, that these things are in the foreground, these things are in the background, and we've achieved that by putting them above the mountains, below the bottoms come forward or below the tree line. So we already automatically just kind of understand that those things are, in the foreground. And I covered up one of my trees back there. Like you can just barely see him peeking out, and that's okay. We know it's there, and that's the important thing. Okay, I'm gonna put a little more paint there, just because I have it on my brush. Oh, I can even, if I want to put some little grasses up in here, I can even just kind of push upward, and that'll just kind of break up that even line. Just kind of make it look more scrubby. Okay, same thing back here if we want to just pop in You can pop in some colors if you want, just a little bit, just to rough it up. You don't want that to be symmetrical back there. Okay, it's up to you. You want that to be soft and kind of fuzzy. All right, here's a fun time. You ready to sock this canvas? Let's sock this canvas. Don't worry about this paint work. Well, actually, let's do it now, because I don't want to confuse you about procedures. I'm going to go back to that dirty brush, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the bottoms of these trees, just like we did before, and I'm going to pull some of these down again, just like we did back here. I'm just going to pull some of these. I'm going to shape a small little hill, maybe going this way. Maybe this little guy, maybe he's going down this way, huh? Maybe. Oh, yeah, maybe that's the way he's going to work. You know what? Let's put a little more color down here. I just grabbed a little bit more of that dark lavender color, and I'm just going to kind of pop in some of that here. Make this area up here dark. Do a little underpainting for some little scrubby grasses. In just a minute, we'll put some scrubby grasses in here. So I'm just going to get some color, and then I'll kind of reshape my little hills. I'll just have this little guy come up. We're in the home stretch. We're almost done here, folks. We only have a couple little trees to put in the foreground, and this is a really fun part. And then we'll put some branches in, and we will call it a day. Okay.
Well, okay, everybody, now that you've got your really cool, happy little trees in, let me show you how to put some additional depth into your painting by putting some old dead pine trees up here in the foreground coming off the sides of our canvas. And what that'll do for us is it'll add a little bit more interest to our painting, but it'll also frame what we have up here to draw the viewer's eye into the center of your frame. And really, it's just kind of a cool thing to put up there. It's a very iconic, Bob Rossian kind of thing to do for those of you who are Bob Ross fans. He would oftentimes like to frame something and provide additional depth by putting big trees up in his foreground. And so we'll do the same. So what we're going to do here is I've switched to a number 6 fan brush only because I'm working on a monstrous canvas here. I'm working on an 18 by 24. Most of you are probably working like an 11 by 14 or 12 by 16. So your number 3 fan brush will perform exactly the same way as this big number 6. Also, too, if you only own a number 6 and you're working on a small canvas, that's fine too. Just be very careful about how much pressure you're applying, because and you'll see in a second, your trunk can just grow and grow and grow, and on a small canvas, you could just completely cover your canvas almost with a tree trunk. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to load my fan brush, the way that we have done in the past. Just going to load both sides by pulling directly down. I might sharpen my brush, right? Remember, wiggle, flip it over, wiggle, pull down, flip it over, pull down. So wiggle, wiggle, pull, pull. So if you do that, that'll help sharpen the ends of your bristles so that they're not all spread apart. But what's kind of funny about that is we sharpen our brush and then we're going to turn right around and try to spread them apart and go crazy. Now, here's one of those cases where you could, as I mentioned earlier, you could potentially ruin your brush, okay? So, as you're doing this over time, if you do a lot of trees this way, your bristles are going to get damaged a little bit. But don't throw these brushes away. Keep them, because they make those great grasses that we're going to do here in the foreground. Okay, so never throw away old brushes unless they're just absolutely unserviceable. Keep these old tattered ones. Like this one is probably a couple of years old. It's in bad shape, and it's perfect for what I'm going to do here. I've loaded my paintbrush. And now I'm going to decide that a tree is just going to kind of live right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sock the canvas hard, and I'm going to spread those bristles apart. And I'm going to just put some color up on this canvas. And I'm going to keep going back and reloading because I don't want a ton of paint on the canvas. I want to stain the paint. Oh, look at that. I'm going to go right through that back mountain. Oh, well. And I want to stain the thing, but I don't want it caked on so terribly much that it's a problem for us. We don't want soupy paint up on the canvas. I'm just staining the canvas. All right, so I'm going to have this come down. I'm going to make this guy wider too. I'm just getting my base line in here, so don't worry. I'm going to make this tree a little bit wider as we go. And I'm going to kind of turn my brush to give this guy some feet to anchor in. We'll get some little bit of root action here. Don't worry, we're going to put some ground in underneath this to kind of tie this in. So don't worry about it so much right now. I'm going to kind of add a little
Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to start adding some width to him. You know, the tree trunks generally get wider near the bottom, so I'm going to kind of taper it out, make sure it's wider at the bottom, and kind of, I'm not going to be like super anal about it, but I am going to start just kind of giving it a little bit of extra trunk here near the bottom. And I'm going to make mine wider, a little bit wider all the way up, just because I want it to be bigger. I think if it's this close to me on a canvas this size, it really should be a little bigger, but you decide how big it's going to be on your canvas. And I'm sure it's fine. Trees grow all kinds of ways. And so however makes you happy is how you should do it on your canvas. I'm going to go back on the other side to kind of... Now, what's kind of interesting about this technique is we're just smashing this in, and you'll notice that as you're doing this on your own camera, the edges of your tree, well, they're kind of fuzzy. And that's okay. That's the way they're supposed to be. So if you're looking for nice, crisp, clean lines, you are doing the wrong kind of tree, because when you're looking at these pine trees, they have a little bit of fuzziness on the edge because that bark is so thick, particularly if you're looking at the pine trees that are out west. They'll oftentimes have these big chunky barks, and they look fuzzy as you're looking at a profile of them. So I'm just going to kind of leave that there, but you can probably see already this is going to start pushing this back. And what the heck, I might as well put a couple on the other side here. I'll switch to my right hand so I'm not in the way of the camera. Put that down. Let's see. And I'll do the same thing over here. I'll just come over here somewhere. I'm going to put 2 trees over here for fun. So I'm going to put a couple little guys that are kind of hanging out together over here. Oh, I'm going to pull that right through my mountain too. But hey, that's the way it goes. You know, you put something in, you get to practice doing it, and then you end up covering it up. And the reason why we do that is, we put it in not only just for the practice of putting it in, but that way when we put something else over the top of it, it looks like it belongs there. Sometimes when you try to cram, you put an element in a painting, then you try to cram something in behind it, it's really, really difficult to get those things in. And so in most cases, really, it's just so much simpler to load. I mean, to put your element into the painting. I was talking about loading my brush. I got my train of thought screwed up. But it's easier just to put in the element you want to be behind it, and then put something else over the top of it. Because you get to practice doing it, which is kind of cool. And then you don't have to worry about sitting there for hours with a little one-haired brush trying to get in there and cramming an element behind this tree. It would just, look for the easier ways to achieve the same effects, and I think you'll be happier. I'm going to put that one there. I'm going to go ahead and put aside. When I realize we haven't put any branches on these things, but stand by. We're going to do that in just a minute. I'm just kind of getting these in while I'm really doing some damage to my brush. That way I can just show you real fast, and then we can break out the liners, and then we'll do these. I'm going to hold on to this easel so that it doesn't shake so much. Getting a lot of camera shake here. And I'm just going to put this guy right here. All right, let's get him in. Come on, you. Also be careful as you're going through this white paint. I think I'd mentioned to you earlier when we were doing the trees that as you're going through this white paint, you might have some difficulty. So you could do 2 things to make it easier. You could allow this painting to dry a little bit overnight. It'll take several days for it to actually dry, and in fact, a couple of weeks for a lot of your colors to dry completely. But you could, before you put in these foreground trees, allow your painting to sit for a day or 2 or even a week if you wanted. Then you can come back in and put these in. Your paint will be dry, and then this will be much, much easier just to get right over the top of it. The other thing you could do is you could thin down your paint with just the smallest amount of paint thinner. But to be honest with you, if you're a new painter and you don't have a lot of experience thinning down your paint, I would not recommend you do that, okay? just because what'll end up happening is you need so little paint thinner that you'll end up putting too much paint thinner onto your canvas, and then your painting will dissolve before your very eyes. And that's no fun for anybody. After you've put in all this work, you might as well hang on to that work, right? So, by the way, I think I mentioned to you, I'm just going into this straight dark lavender that I mixed. Okay, so I'm going to pull this guy down just a little bit so they don't look like they're exactly even. So one will be, the further you pull something down into the canvas, the closer it is to you in the foreground. So I'm going to want these guys to be just slightly staggered. And your trees don't have to be straight. Like you see, this guy isn't straight. Trees don't grow straight. Not always. A lot of times they have all kinds of issues. All right. They're very much like us. They all grow different ways, okay? So I'm going to put down that fan brush. And what I'm going to do, let me go ahead and put some ground in now, just so that it can kind of help tie it into in your mind. It'll just kind of tie the painting in a little better, because right now our trees are just kind of floating up there. So I'm going to go back into my 1-inch brush, and I'm going to just tap in one side of my brush with some of that dark color. Okay, just get your paintbrush, a fair amount of paint, but not a ton. And I'm just going to come over, and I'm going to fill in the rest of this canvas with this very, very dark color. So let this dark color just kind of happen in here. Okay, tap, 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 tap to get it in. You can shape this foreground however you like. Now I've got this nice little light area back behind it, so I want to keep some of that, but I'm going to make some of my ground kind of bumpy and hilly, just kind of roll in a little bit here in this foreground. And don't worry, we're going to put some grasses. I'll show you how to do some kind of cool grasses and little weeds to kind of add a little bit more fun and interest to this foreground in here. Fun thing about these video classes is we're not limited to normally when you come and paint a class with me in person, we're limited to 4 hours, and so I can only show you so many things that go into painting before we run out of time. And with these, you can start and stop whenever you want. You can take a break for several days or a couple of weeks in between a lot of these steps, which is an interesting point to make to you. If you, I know that I'm painting this painting in a hurry, but when you're painting at home, take your time. As the guidance on this is, we've put that liquid white in here, and sometimes I get questions about, can I stop the painting at a certain spot and come back to it later? And the guidance to you is, as long as you get all of your paint on the canvas that requires either using like liquid white or liquid clear, where you have to move the painting, like here we still had to move the painting by pulling paint across the ground. As long as you get everything into your painting that requires movement of paint, then you can stop when you get to that point. So let's say you're putting reflections in a lake. As long as you get everything done and then you put your reflection into the lake, then you can let it dry and then come back and fix it or finish it later. But if you walk away before you finish the elements that need to kind of require movement of paint on the canvas, then you're going to have a lot more difficult time coming in and getting the effects that you want. Okay, so like in this case, this foreground, I could have let this painting dry completely for several days and then come back and then just put like this foreground in here, because we're not moving any more paint on the canvas. We're just tapping it in and drawing right on the top of it. So, and like right here, I'm just tapping in a little bit right there. All of that stuff could be done with the canvas being completely dry. It doesn't require it to be wet with the liquid white or liquid clear. And also the next step when we're going to put in these branches, that also does not require that. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little sense to you. You can stop where you want as long as you no longer have to move paint, okay? All right, so here we go. So while we were talking about that, I was continuing on just to bounce in a little bit of grass. And so look, how we talked about before when we did this plane back here, remember I was telling you that each plane you add gives you more depth and distance. Well, now look what we just did. We put these trees in and then put a little bit of ground, and so now that also pushed everything else back. So this gave our painting even more depth, working all the way back. So how many planes do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 different implied distances in this painting, which really makes your canvas look a little more three-dimensional than just the two-dimensional flat surface that it is, okay? So, all right, so I'm gonna go to a round brush. You can use whatever you've got. I'm gonna use this little round brush because I can get a little more detail, okay? So any kind of round brush you have, even if you just have one of those cheap acrylic brushes, that you get, at your local dollar store or whatever. For this particular function, at the beginning they'll be fine, but I do recommend though that if you're painting with me with one of those brushes that you get rid of them, because those brushes are going to fall apart, they're going to shed all over your canvas. They just don't work very well, but if that's what you've got, you can use it for this function. But I do recommend that you invest in some good brushes, and we can get those for you. Both synthetics and acrylics, the synthetics and natural bristle brushes we use here are fantastic. So this actually happens to be one of the brushes that come in the Bob Ross floral sets, but it's just a normal brush. It's a number 6 round brush, but it's about the size of most other manufacturers' number 3 round brushes. So if you get a brush, I would really recommend for most other manufacturers, if you're not buying this Bob Ross brush, that you get a number 3 round, okay, for this particular function. All right, so I'm just going to come up here and let me just put a couple little branches. So I'm not going to put a lot in here because these trees are close to me and they're dead. So let's just make an assumption that there's only going to have a few branches up in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put branches in here just to kind of frame my mountain. So I'm going to take some of that, just a straight dark colored paint, and I'm just going to kind of attach a branch into my tree here. I'm gonna grab some more paint, and I'm just gonna bring this. I'm gonna wiggle and bounce him around so that it's somewhat random. Okay, I'm not spending a lot of thought on this other than to wiggle it around. Now, anytime that there's a place that has like a little where if you're just wiggling and jiggling, you get these little bends, like these little knuckle knotty areas in your branch, and that is a great place then to take another side one off. So as I'm coming off this canvas to make these lines thinner, I'm pulling my brush off of the canvas. Okay, that way that little point that's on the brush will do a little more for us. Okay, I'm going to come in and put a little more finer details in. These are just the basic branches, because I'm going to come in with a script liner brush and I'm going to put in greater detailed, smaller limbs. So don't think that this is the final product, okay? So these are just the kind of the larger branches. Because I'm working with a large brush, I'm going to need to come in with a smaller brush to get these details in. So maybe this guy, he kind of breaks off over there and goes that way. Oh, heck, let's have another little guy jut out here. That looks like a great place for one. Okay. All right, so this just really helps us frame. I'm going to thicken this guy up a little bit right here because he looks like he needs a little more. Looks like he needs a little more support to me. All right, so let's put a little dead guy. Maybe he's broken off over here. Oh, what the heck? Let's let this guy go off the canvas. So you can change your mind as you go. You don't have to stick with one. You don't have to stick with the one thought on your canvas. You can do what you want. This is your world, so do it however makes you happy. Okay, so I'm just going to pop him, and I'm going to make him go off the canvas. Okay, all right. So we've got them. Maybe we'll put a little. I'm just going to put a little texture in here, like there's a branch that's coming off the front going toward us. You can't really see a lot of that, but if you're looking at the painting in person, you can see that it's in here, because branches don't just grow on the left and the right of a tree as you're looking at them, right? They grow all the way around it. So you have to also consider that you've got some things on this side of the tree and also on the back side. Like, for instance, you might have a little backside branch that's coming off, and it's just kind of bouncing around. It's kind of bouncing around here, and that would kind of imply that it's coming off the back side of our tree. Okay, so you want to consider that. Okay, so I'm going to put some little smaller branches with my script liner brush that are coming off here. And those are going to be even smaller because they're on the backside of the tree, moving sort of away, diagonally away from us. So I'll spend some time, especially after the painting dries. That's the other thing. I like to take I don't have it with me, but I take a very small, like a number 0 signing brush or a 12-0 signing brush, and after the painting completely dries, I'll come back in with my lavender paint and I will put in hundreds of little wispy branches at the end of the things. Now in this case, since the tree's dead, you're probably not going to have those, and pines don't really have a ton of those little wispy branches at the end, but most of these probably from the wind blowing and stuff have probably blown off, so don't worry too much about doing that. But if you're doing some other trees, especially the deciduous trees that grow up and have those very long, small things, you'll want to get a different, a very, very, very small script liner or signing brush for that. Okay, so let me also then just kind of frame another one over here. And in a good way, you know what? A good way to do your branches, if you have trouble like just kind of letting go and letting the things happen on the canvas for you, is you can, when you're doing your branches, you can spin your brush and it'll automatically make these things happen. So if you spin it, it'll automatically do it for you. So you don't have to think about where your brush is going, because as you're moving your hands, you're kind of losing control of the brush, and the brush just kind of does things for you that look a little more natural. So give it a try. You know, you can do it how you like, and you should try many things and see how things work for you. So see what works best. There's not just one way of doing things. Okay, let me get him. He doesn't look natural, so let's give him a little more. Okay, again, be loose, be friendly with these little things, because if you're nice and friendly with them, they'll just happen for you. So if you get all grumple-lumpy on them and you're trying to make them just do things for you, they're going to fight back. They, being the branches, are going to fight back with you, and then you're going to have a result that you're not going to be real happy with. I've got a little broken guy over there, maybe a little broken guy here. Because you know, these pine trees, even the healthy ones, they have all those little, we'll call them breaky off areas. So these branches will break all the time. All right, so one thing else that you got to consider is that let's have branches that also to go, you know, behind one another. And that implies that you've got, gives you a little more depth in your painting. So we want this guy to just kind of come behind this guy. So I'm not going to pull him through. All right. So let's give this guy a little. And maybe another little broken guy there. I mean, this guy's, after all, this guy's dead, right? So maybe we'll just pull this guy right off that canvas there. And don't worry about these edges. 1/8 of your frame of your canvas when you put this into a frame is going to be concealed. So as long as you get it over here, you don't have to worry about painting on the side of these things. Pop them in a frame. You know, it'll cover up the 1/8 of an edge all the way across it. And by all means, put your paintings in a frame, because it'll make a painting look better. It just really makes them look finished and nice when you do that. Here, I'm going to just get a little color down in here just because. Okay. And I'm going to come back in here in a second. I'm going to show you how to put in some highlights on your trees just to give them a little more color. So that's enough branches for me. The branches really aren't that big of a deal here. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to kind of put some of those little smaller areas. So I've grabbed my script liner brush, and I'm going into my paint thinner. So I've got to thin this paint down. So I'm going to put my brush into the paint thinner, and I'm going to hold on to hold on to that that thinner that's in there, and then I'm going to come down into a thin spot of my paint, and I'm going to work this paint around, switch it back and forth till it's running like ink, right? You want it to be the consistency of ink. I'm going to spin my brush to load it. I'm going to spin it, load it, and as I come off the canvas, I'm going to continue to rotate it, and that'll give me a nice little point at the end of my brush, and I can come in here now, and I can do a lot of this little smaller detail work that I mentioned to you, okay? Now, like I said, most of those are probably going to have broken off, but maybe we have a few that are still remaining that haven't quite. Haven't quite gone away, so as I'm starting in the thicker part, and then I'm coming off of the canvas in order to make the very, very small ends of these branches. And I do that just because that's the way it works for me. Some people can go the opposite direction, and you should do whichever way works best for you. Me, I don't trust myself to start with a very thin line. It's always easier for me to touch the canvas and then come off of it, okay? And to me, it just makes sense for my puny little brain to figure out how to do that better. So I think we all develop, ways that work best for us as we progress in our little painting journey. So, by all means, who am I to tell you what works best for you? I hope that you try some of the things that I show you, but ultimately, each of us paints differently, and you should not hesitate to experiment and try something new. Here, I'm going to just give that guy a little more width there. There we go. All right. So we're actually going to come in here in just a minute too, and we don't want just one solid dead color because we're painting with the same color on this tree. So I'm going to show you how to use a little bit of white in just a moment, and we'll put in some extra little details. Now this guy, he's broken off, so he doesn't really get anything super duper thin. But what I would like to do is to bring him across my mountain, because that'll help push that mountain even further into the background if we have at least something on this little branch here. Okay. Notice I'm continually loading my brush because you'll run out of paint. So just keep going into that wet paint. And if you run out of that inky paint, then go back and get some more thinner into your brush and mix yourself another little pile. Because what you don't want to do is you do not want to try to force the paint to go onto the canvas, because it doesn't work that way. The paint is not cooperative. Paint's going to do what paint does, right? So anytime that you're attempting to make the paint go onto the canvas, all you're going to end up doing is mixing a bunch of mud on your canvas, and that won't make you happy, okay? It's kind of funny how it works that way. It's like it just does its own thing. But once you get used to how your paint behaves, right? Because different brands of paints and even different colors in the same brand of paint behave differently. So the more you paint, the more experience you get with your paints. Then you know what it does. Then you know how much thinner you need to make it slide off your brush. The better you are, or better off you are in your painting experience. And you could just I know you could sit here and I could do this for 20 hours, but and like I said, this is just my first stage. So I'll probably come back. If this were a deciduous tree, I would probably come back and let it dry for several days, and then I would come back with my little teeny tiny brush. And I would make these even more detailed than this, so I could have a lot more coming off of it if this was a live tree that I was painting. But for here, we'll just do some of these and all right, I think that pretty much does it for that. Okay, so let's come in. I'm going to go back to a fan brush. I'm going to grab a clean fan, but you could wipe off. You can either wash and completely dry your fan brush, or you can just kind of wipe off that excess dark paint that you had when we put in these trees here. And what I'm going to do, and either one is fine. I've done this painting both of those ways with the exact same end result, so it's okay. So whichever you prefer, you can either wash it and just if you wash it, make sure that fan brush is completely dry. You don't want any paint thinner on it whatsoever, because every time you touch that canvas and you're putting paint thinner on, you're thinning the paint that's up here, and it'll turn these trees into soup. So I recommend, really just give that brush a really thorough wipe. But I know some of you are a little more particular, and so you might want a clean brush to start with, and that's okay. All right, just make sure it's dry. All right, so remember we talked earlier in the painting about how our light source was coming from the right, which is why our mountains are highlighted predominantly on the right-hand side. And that's why we had just some snow in these little pockets here, because the sunlight's not hitting them because they're shaded, right, from the sun. So that means any light that we put on our trees and in our grass needs to be predominantly coming from the right-hand side. So what I've done is I've loaded just the smallest amount of paint. See, I just tapped in the smallest amount of paint onto the ends of the bristles of my brush. I mean, there's like almost no paint on there. And an easy way to do that is to take your brush and you can just barely touch inside a little bit of a paint, and it'll load it. What we're going to do is we're going to start from the right side of our tree, and we're going to just barely touch. I'm barely touching this canvas, and we're just going to tap in just the smallest amount of color starting on the right-hand side of your tree trunk, and we're going to kind of graduate that back over to the left. So as we go back to the left, it will get darker, 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 and sometimes you can wipe off that excess paint into your paper towel because you're going to pick up a lot of that dark paint. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes and kind of pop in some color, just a little bit. Just a little bit. It should be very, very, very faint. Just enough really to kind of differentiate. This is just an ambient light reflection on here, so it's not like a direct sunlight, because remember, this entire valley is shaded from the sun that's over here below our foothills here that we put in earlier. So we want to just put a little bit of ambient light just to differentiate this from the trees that are in the foreground. And this also gives us a little bit of texture for our bark, right? So we can start to see those lines in the bark, because our very tap marks from our brush are putting in those great little pockets of light and dark that would imply that there's bark there. So that's kind of neat because it gives texture. Because that's one of the other ways that you show distance and depth in a painting is through texture. Back here, not a lot of texture. Everything back here is very smooth. Remember how we brushed out those mountains to make them smooth, and that pushed them into the distance? Well, these things that are up here in the foreground, those, here I'm gonna pop a little color on the into my branches just a little bit too, just a smidgen. Anyway, but up here, they're so close to us that we want to be able to see some of that texture, some of that bark. So that's why we have the details with having the little fuzzy edges of the bark, and then now we can see some of this light, and that gives us, so it'll be darker, darker, darker as you move toward the left. Okay, and that is how you do it, okay? And so you can go ahead and do that on the right-hand side of these other two trees as well. One thing I like about these lavender paintings Hopefully some of you have painted that lavender seascape with me. What I like about the lavender paintings, not only do I, just because I like lavender, but it has a really interesting, nice, neat effect when you just take a very dark lavender and then just apply a little bit of white to it. You can do a lot with the lavender. And technically, you can do it with any of the transparent colors. Those will all work the same way that this does. And I just happen to like the lavender color, and it's easy. Most people have a red and a blue in their paint kits that they have. You know, whatever you've accumulated over the years, you usually have a red and a blue. And well, as you know, red and blue make lavender. So it's an easy painting to get a lot of people to paint along with you, because it uses colors that they probably already have. Okay. So I might firm that up. Some of these little extra fuzzy areas, I might just give a little bit of tap to kind of incorporate them into the tree a little better. There we go. You might have the experience in the same. Now, if you get a little spot that's a little too bright as you're doing this, just don't load more paint. Go back and grab from that bright spot. And then, like I'm doing right here, I'm just kind of picking up this little area right here, just to kind of tap it. And notice I'm tapping incredibly gently. If you were heavy-handed, you're gonna just destroy your paint that's on there. And you're gonna mix mud. And that really will not give you good results. So over time, try to really get a gentle touch, a very, very, very gentle touch. Okay. And because I'm just barely touching. Okay. All right. So this gives me a really nice amount of texture. Let me flip that over. I got a little more paint over there. All right. Okay. So down here, you might have experienced, where you might have gotten a brush stroke down past the bottom of your thing. I just took a little bit of that dark paint, and I'll just come right back over and then just firm that up. That's not a problem. Same thing over here. I can kind of touch through the bottom of my tree, and that'll just kind of anchor that into the ground a little better, because you don't want your tree sitting as you're viewing your painting like it's sitting on top of the ground. This one looks like it's not actually in the ground, so there we go. Let's make sure we give it an anchor point. And then I'll go back in here and touch it. You gotta make that sound. You gotta make that sound or it won't work right. Okay, so you should have fun painting. All right, looks like we are pretty good. As we go here, I'm just double checking, make sure I didn't forget to show you anything. Okay, now let me show you how to do some of these little grasses down here. Let's start with the script liner brush first. You know, we had that script liner where you were using that dark paint to do your branches. You can just go grab a little bit more thinner, and we're gonna go right into that dark paint again. So mix yourself up a little bit more thin dark paint. I think I need a little more paint thinner. Sometimes you might need to go back and dunk a couple of times. I have a really bad habit, and maybe some of you are experiencing too. I'm kind of a cheapskate with paints, so I don't like to waste paint. So sometimes I try to mix these little things in too little paint. So if you're having trouble getting like an ink-like consistency where it's starting to run, it probably means you don't have enough ink or enough paint and enough thinner to actually make it do anything. So that's what I've got going on right here right now, as I'm trying to get this back to a good consistency. Okay, so I'm going to spin that brush to load it, pull off just like we did before to give myself a nice little point. And what I want to do now is I want to put some little grassy things up in the foreground. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to kind of rotate this up, and I'm going to kind of flip things over and pull away from the canvas as I'm coming up in all kinds of different directions. So I'm just going to pop in the smallest little lines Okay, and this'll give us a little bit of contrast, and it'll break up these more solid lines that we have from our foreground grasses. So it'll just look like you've got a bunch of little scrubby grasses that are growing up over here, you know? And you can put in hundreds of these little things. Just be careful. Make sure you're using that nice thin paint, or it won't, with a very light touch, otherwise your lines are going to get too thick. So you just really want to use the end of that brush. Okay, so if your paint's not sliding off your brush, see it starts to do that, then that means that your paint is getting a little bit too dry. So go back in, get some paint thinner, and mix up your paint. Because your paint needs to be very thin for this, because you're trying to apply a paint on top of a paint that is already on the canvas. So whatever you're putting on now must be thinner than what's on here already. So I'm just popping in all these nice little things, and it takes some time. So just bear with me as we get these in, or you can fast forward your tape or whatever it is. Tape, God, that made me sound old. Your video. Oh my God. Now we're also going to come in a minute, and we're going to put in some lighter color grasses, right? So these nice little things, they kind of contrast really well against those light areas in your painting, and not as starkly over here. But that's okay, because it takes light to show dark, dark to show light. So these are going to be a little different. And even over here, these over here are still darker than what's in front of them, so you can still see them. So that's part of those things that add interest into your painting. And then we'll come back and we'll kind of mix up some color, and we'll put in different color ones in a minute. We'll add in some white, as if there's some reflected light. That's kind of, all right. So now when this kind of thing happens, you got to figure out what you're going to do about that. I don't know what I'm going to do about it yet. Maybe this I don't know. I'll figure it out in a minute. Not too worried about it. This is one way I'll do it. Maybe it'll become something. Maybe that's a sapling or something. There we go. We'll just kind of make lots of things grow around it. Okay, some longer grasses that are popping up. Okay. Now, hopefully you like the effect you're getting there. Of course, if you don't like this, you don't have to do it. Just like everything else, it's your painting, so whatever makes you happy is great. So I've got some nice little short grasses that are growing up in there. I'm going to go back into my paint thinner, and I'm going to come over here. I got some like a purpley white, right? It gives me a nice little light color. So use whatever's on your palette. It's fine. You've probably got some dirty paint over here that you can use. So anything that's going to contrast this would be fantastic. And we're going to use this paint again in a few minutes to pop in some grasses in a different way. So this is just our first layer of grasses that you can kind of see popping up over the hillside. So I'm actually going to show you how to do a different kind of grass in here to kind of finish off this foreground a little bit. Let's see how this looks. Yeah, so now just pop these in here and there. You don't need to do nearly as many of these. This is just to give yourself a different shade of color in these grasses, like the light, whatever ambient light that is in there might be hitting these just slightly differently. Okay, so you can just pop them in, try not to make a big error like that, but don't worry, we're going to cover that up. So these little things up here, you're probably going to have little marks that are going to show a little bit at the base of your trees that you're popping in, but that's okay, don't worry about it, because like I said, in this next round of grasses that we put in, I'm going to show you what we do with these. This is like everything else we do. We build these in layers. And so the thing that we put in front of whatever this is anchors all of these things into the ground, conceals some of these brush marks, but then ultimately looks great because it adds things into your painting that you may not have even thought to put in there before, like And you know, it's kind of funny too, because people who are looking at paintings probably aren't even going to notice that you put these things in there. But their brain is going to just remark to themselves that that's the way it should be, right? Because that's the way things look in nature when you look at them. So although they don't consciously think about it, they'll notice if the stuff's not there. So you put in all these little details, really just for other folks. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go back to the fan brush that I used to sock in my trees, and you'll notice that your fan brush is probably all raggedy now from socking in those trees, and that's exactly what we want. What I've got is I still got some old paint on there that we used for those, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up. I'm going to rotate the handle of my brush very sharply downward so that I'm just using the sides of the bristles of the brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just use very short strokes up and away from this canvas, right? Barely touching the canvas, just to put in some little grassy things. It's just going to pop up. It's going to give us texture. All right, and it's also going to do, like I said before, it's going to cover up some of these little things. You might have to go back and get some paint. All right, and I'm just using the dark paint that was on my brush. I'm going to come back in a minute. You can even go this way if you want. If you really want to, you can rotate up and tap downward, and kind of do them both ways actually if you want, because that way, here, look, I'll show you this way, because that way you can do them this way. And that breaks up that symmetry, right? And then you can come back in too and just very short strokes up and away from the canvas. And the more your brush is kind of raggedy, the better the effect is going to be on this. Now, you might have guessed, you might be able to see, probably can't see it in my painting, but in your own painting, you probably see that you've got just some little texture brush strokes in there. So now I can go into like a white. I can grab a little bit of white paint on my brush, just a little. Mine's actually a really super light lavender because I'm using that same dirty paint. And now I can do the same thing with white, and I can just kind of pop in little pockets here and there of where I think there might be some reflected light coming in. And it just adds a lot more to your grasses. And this is something that we just don't have a lot of time to do in the in-person classes. Usually if it's a 4-hour class. Now in the 6 and 8 hour workshops, or sometimes we do the three-day workshops, we would have time to do these. But usually in an in-person class, we don't do this. So there is a benefit really to doing these video classes. So we appreciate you joining us for this, because we're showing you everything we could possibly show you on this painting to make sure that you have as much success as possible. All right, so I'm just putting in short grasses, and some of the just because, you know, again, my hiking experiences, this is just what is familiar to me. And make sure that these things also go in different directions. Grasses don't grow all the same way, so you can rotate your brush around. But and then you can come back in here if I wanted to tone some of these down. I could even go back in to my black, like I just wanted to tone that down a little bit right there. You can go back and forth, but don't do it too much because you'll end up mixing a little muddy area there, and I don't think you'll be happy with that. But so that should do it for us for the painting. The only thing that's left now is to sign your painting, and the way to do that is to just go like we did with our script liner brush. Oh heck, let me just show you, because I got this nice lavender color here, so let me do that. I'm going to go back into my paint thinner, and I'm going to make another nice little runny area in my light little lavender. Since lavender painting, I might as well use what's on the palette. All right, and I'm going to twirl that brush, get it to a point, and oh gosh, where's a good place for me? So I'll sign in this little pocket right here. So remember, make sure you leave yourself at least 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the canvas. And see, that just puts it on. You're probably not going to get too many letters out of it. You're going to have to continually load your brush, but that's okay. You've probably got plenty of paint on your canvas left over. So load away. And let me just shore that up
All right, and there we go. Well, that does it for us today, folks. Thanks so much for joining me for this fun little painting. I hope that you had great success with your painting. Make sure you keep practicing and go to our website for more instructional videos. And we sure hope to see you the next time we come to one of our in-person classes in your town. Hope we see you then. See you in class.